The blue light of the screen washes over everything, flickering like a heartbeat on the polished marble floor. It's the floor of a place I never thought I'd stand, bathed in the glare of a screen showing letters I still can barely believe are real. My company. My logo. Up there. On the New York Stock Exchange. The noise is a distant roar, a tidal wave of numbers and voices, but here, in this small, cordoned-off space, it feels like silence. A deep, echoing silence where the only sound is the frantic, uneven rhythm of my own breathing. My hands are shaking, the tremble starting deep in my core and radiating outwards. It's not fear. Not exactly. It's everything. Every late night, every closed door, every whispered doubt, every scream I held inside. It's all here, now, reflected in the blue light of that screen. If this story finds you right now, I'd love to know where in the world you are and what time it is as you're listening. It helps me feel less alone sharing this space. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. It helps me more than you could possibly know to keep telling these stories, to keep bringing these experiences to life. Before this moment, before the screens and the silence and the shaking hands, there was just life. A quiet hum of routine. We lived in a house that felt too big for two people, filled with expensive furniture that seemed to absorb sound. He liked things quiet, controlled. He liked knowing where everything was, including me. I worked from a small office carved out of a spare bedroom, building a modest online business. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't disruptive. It was steady. It paid the bills, mostly. My bills. He had his own world, stocks and mergers and golf weekends. Our lives ran parallel, like two trains on separate tracks, occasionally glimpsing each other through the windows, but never really converging. I had dreams, quiet ones. Expanding the business, maybe hiring someone, traveling more than the mandated annual trip to his parents' place. But they felt like fragile little birds, easily scared away by a dismissive look or a sigh that implied my ambitions were cute. A little hobby. Something to keep me busy while he handled the real finances, the real future. He managed everything. The joint accounts, the investments, the credit cards. It made sense, he said. He understood these things. I was the creative one. The one who built pretty websites and wrote engaging copy. Numbers weren't my strength. He'd pat my hand, a gesture that felt less like affection and more like ownership, and tell me not to worry my head about it. I had access, of course. A card in my name, the login to the online banking that I rarely used because he handled the bill pay. It felt like a partnership of convenience, built on a foundation of unspoken assumptions. My work was my own, my small corner of independence in a life that otherwise felt increasingly prescribed. I poured my energy into it, finding a quiet satisfaction in building something, brick by digital brick. It was mine. It was safe. Or so I thought. The shift was subtle at first. Little things. A transaction declined, unexpectedly. A login attempt failing, then succeeding after I reset the password. A growing impatience from him when I asked about money for business expenses, even though my business was profitable, covering my share, and then some. He started talking more about tightening belts, about the market being volatile, about needing to consolidate assets, simplify. It all sounded so responsible, so logical. He was the expert, wasn't he? I didn't question it. Why would I? We were married. We were a team. Then came the day the hum stopped. The day the quiet life shattered. It wasn't a fight. There was no shouting. Just a cold, deliberate act. I needed to pay a vendor, a large amount, larger than usual because I was expanding into a new product line. I logged into the online banking and the login I'd used for years, the one he'd given me, didn't work. I tried again. Incorrect credentials. Panic fluttered in my chest. I called the bank. There must be a mistake. A glitch. The voice on the other end of the line was polite, apologetic, and utterly unyielding. I'm sorry, ma'am. Access to that account has been restricted by the primary account holder. Restricted? What did that even mean? I tried the other joint account. Same result. I checked the credit cards. Declined. Every single one. My personal checking account, linked to my business earnings, was still accessible, but it held a meager amount, barely enough for groceries, let alone business expenses. He hadn't just restricted access. He had cut me off. I confronted him that evening. He was sitting in his study, the room smelling of old leather and his expensive whiskey. He didn't look up from his laptop at first. I stood in the doorway, my voice trembling, explaining what had happened, my hands shaking. He finally closed the laptop with a soft click. His expression wasn't angry. It was calm, controlled, almost pitying. He explained it then, his voice low and even, like he was discussing market fluctuations. He decided to simplify things further. Given the uncertain economic climate, he'd consolidated everything under his name. It was just practical. For our financial security. He explained that my business was too risky, too unpredictable, that I spent money foolishly. He said he was protecting us.
Protecting me.
And then he said the words that froze the air in my lungs. "You'll need to understand your position now," he said, his eyes holding mine, cold and clear. "You have no independent access to funds. Nothing substantial. Your business isn't viable without significant capital, which you don't have. Not anymore." He leaned back in his chair, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "You'll come to your senses. You'll see that this is for the best. You'll crawl back."
Crawl back.
The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He didn't just block the accounts. He built a cage. He stripped away my financial autonomy, my safety net, my ability to operate my business, and presented it as a benevolent act of control. He expected me to break, to realize my helplessness, and to return, tail between my legs, accepting his terms, his protection. He thought he had won. He thought he had extinguished any spark of independence I possessed.
He thought he had me.
The first few days were a blur of disbelief and raw panic. I called friends, family. Some offered sympathy, a few offered small loans, but no one could comprehend the totality of it. The house was still mine, technically shared property, but without access to money, I was a prisoner in it. He continued on as normal, eating dinner across from me, talking about his day, completely ignoring the fact that he had just detonated my financial world. He seemed to enjoy the quiet power he now held. He watched me, that same calm, pitying expression in his eyes, waiting for the first sign of capitulation. I tried everything. I called lawyers, only to find I couldn't afford their retainers. I explored legal aid, but the process was slow, complicated, and offered no immediate solution to the fact that I needed to buy groceries. My small personal account dwindled rapidly. The vendor I couldn't pay became increasingly insistent, threatening legal action. The business I had nurtured felt like it was slipping through my fingers like sand. I had inventory I couldn't pay for, services I couldn't maintain, marketing I couldn't fund. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, replaced by hours staring at the ceiling, the words "crawl back" echoing in the darkness. Humiliation gnawed at me. How had I been so naive? How had I let someone else hold all the keys to my life? Every corner of the house, every object, felt tainted by his control. I was living in his world, on his terms, with no means to escape. He left small amounts of cash on the counter sometimes, like giving scraps to a stray dog. It was never enough. It was always accompanied by that look. The look that said, "See? You can't even manage this." The look that said, "I told you so. Now, are you ready to come back?" Each dollar felt like a leash, a constant reminder of my dependency. I wanted to throw it back in his face, burn it, anything but take his tainted money. But I was hungry. I needed gas for my car. I needed basics. The indignity was a physical weight on my chest. My early attempts to salvage the business were futile. I tried bartering services, pleading with vendors, offering payment plans I couldn't guarantee. Each failure chipped away at my resolve. I was trying to fight a fire with a teacup of water. The scale of the problem, the sheer, impenetrable wall of his financial control, felt insurmountable. He had calculated it perfectly. He hadn't left me enough to fight. He had left me just enough to suffer, to feel the pinch, to feel the despair set in, and to eventually, inevitably, crawl back. The rising challenges weren't just financial. They were emotional, psychological. Friends stopped calling as often, unsure what to say, or perhaps tired of hearing the same story of helplessness. His friends looked through me at social events, if I even dared to go. I felt invisible, a non-person stripped of agency. The house, once just too big, now felt cavernous and hostile. Every time he walked into a room, I tensed. Every calm instruction felt like a threat. He never raised his voice, not about this. His power was in the quiet certainty of my expected defeat. My physical health started to deteriorate. I lost weight. Sleep deprivation painted dark circles under my eyes. My mind felt foggy, slow. The creativity that fueled my business, the spark that made it successful in the first place, was buried under layers of stress and fear. I sat at my desk in the spare bedroom, staring at the blank screen, the cursor blinking like a mocking eye. What was the point? How could I build anything when the foundation had been dynamited? The financial pressure intensified. Utility bills arrived, addressed to us, but I knew he wouldn't pay them unless I showed signs of compliance. Late fees piled up. Disconnection notices became regular mail. The car insurance lapsed. The fear of being stranded, of being left without even basic services, was crippling. I was trapped in a gilded cage, but the bars were made of financial leverage, cold and unforgiving. He didn't issue ultimatums. He didn't need to. He just let the pressure build. He'd make casual comments about living within one's means, or how difficult times reveal who is truly capable. He was tightening the screws, slowly, deliberately, confident in his strategy. He was patient. He could afford to be. I couldn't. There was a specific evening. The power had been off for 6 hours that day because I couldn't pay the partial bill needed to keep it on. He was out at dinner. I was alone in the dim house, huddled under a blanket, the silence broken only by the rumbling in my stomach. The refrigerator was almost empty. My phone battery was dying. Despair washed over me, cold and absolute. I couldn't see a way out. The idea of crawling back, of ending this agony, of trading my shattered pride for basic security, whispered in my ear. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't capable. Maybe this was my only option. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. Just give up. It will be over. And then, just as I felt the last flicker of resistance dying, something shifted. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, more like a slow burn igniting in my gut. It started as a low ember of resentment, fueled by the cold, dark house and the gnawing hunger. Resentment turned to anger. Anger at him. Anger at myself for letting it happen. Anger at the sheer, arrogant certainty in his eyes when he said, "Crawl back." He expected it. He relied on my helplessness. He thought he had calculated every angle, foreseen every possible move. But he had underestimated one thing: the power of having nothing left to lose. When you're at the absolute bottom, when the fear has become a constant companion and the humiliation a second skin, something changes. The ground falls away, and there's nothing to catch you but your own will. In that dark, cold house, something inside me snapped. It wasn't the snap of breaking. It was the snap of tightening, of stealing. Crawl back? Never. Not if I had to live on the streets. Not if I had to build everything from dust with my bare hands. His words, meant to be a chain, became a spark. He wanted me to crawl? I would stand. I would stand taller than he could ever imagine. The business I had built, the one he deemed not viable, was still there, a fragile skeleton. It needed capital, yes. But it also needed reinvention. It needed a strategy born not of cautious growth, but of desperate, audacious survival. I started to think differently. Not about how to get back what I had lost, but about how to build something entirely new, something that could never be taken away from me again. My skills were real. My understanding of my market was real. What I lacked was resources. But resources could be found, or created, or circumvented. The midpoint shift wasn't about finding external help. It was about an internal revolution. I stopped seeing myself as a victim and started seeing myself as a strategist. My mind, previously clouded by fear, became sharp, focused.
He thought he had cornered me.
He didn't realize he had simply forced me onto a different path, one he couldn't see, couldn't control. The dry humor emerged here, a dark, cynical laugh in the face of absurdity. He thought I was a pet he could starve into obedience. He was about to find out I was a wolf he had simply driven into the wilderness. The struggle didn't end with a shift in mindset. It deepened. Knowing what I had to do was one thing, actually doing it with no resources was another. The hunger was still real. The fear of utilities being cut off was still real. Living in the same house with the architect of my despair was a constant, grinding challenge. I avoided him, spent hours holed up in the spare room, working on my new plan. He seemed to notice the change, the lack of visible despair. His calm gave way to a subtle annoyance, a questioning look that asked, "Why aren't you breaking yet?" I started selling things. Not just old clothes, but furniture, decor, anything that felt less like a shared life and more like dead weight. It was painful, stripping the house bare, but each item sold was a small infusion of cash, a tiny bit of fuel for the fire. It was also a silent declaration of independence. This wasn't his house anymore. It was just a building I was temporarily occupying. The new business idea was audacious. It leveraged my existing skills but targeted a different, underserved market, a niche I'd researched but dismissed as too difficult before. Now, too difficult sounded like possible. It required innovation, bootstrapping, relying on favors, and building relationships with people who believed in me, often people he would have dismissed as insignificant. I worked around the clock. Sleepless nights were no longer a symptom of despair but a necessity. Caffeine and pure adrenaline became my fuel. There were setbacks. So many setbacks. Deals fell through at the last minute. Technology failed. People I trusted let me down. Money ran out again and again. There were days I stared at the empty refrigerator, tears streaming down my face, wondering if I could really do this. The tempting whisper of giving up returned, louder this time, laced with the exhaustion that permeated my bones. He would sometimes leave articles about failed startups lying around, highlighted passages about unrealistic expectations and market crashes. Passive-aggressive warfare waged in the silent halls of the house. He still expected me to crack. His patience hadn't run out. He was simply waiting for the inevitable collapse. But every failure, every closed door, every skeptical look was fuel. Each setback honed my plan, forced me to be more creative, more resilient. I learned to stretch a dollar until it screamed. I learned to rely on my own judgment, my own instincts. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, burning determination. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about vindication. It was about proving him wrong. It was about reclaiming my life so completely that his act of control would be exposed for what it was, a desperate, pathetic attempt to hold on to something he never truly owned. The deepening crisis reached its nadir when I almost lost everything. A key partner pulled out. A major contract I had been banking on fell through due to unforeseen market changes. I was weeks away from launching, and suddenly, the entire structure felt like it was collapsing. I had poured every last cent, every ounce of energy, every desperate hope into this. And it wasn't going to happen. I remember sitting on the floor of my empty office room, surrounded by unpacked boxes of inventory I couldn't sell, the silence of the house pressing in. It felt like the darkness from that night months ago had returned, thicker, more absolute. This time, there was no anger, just a profound, bone-weary sadness.
I had fought so hard.
And I had lost. He was right. I wasn't capable. The whisper of "crawl back" wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a roar, promising an end to the pain. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over his contact. I could almost hear his voice, the calm, victorious tone, the "I told you so" one call. One surrender, and it would be over. But then, I saw something on my desk. A small, crumpled piece of paper. It was a note I'd scribbled to myself weeks ago, during one of those frantic, sleepless nights. It had only 2 words on it, underlined twice. Remember why. Remember why. Not just why I needed money, or independence. Remember why I couldn't crawl back. Because it wasn't just about finances. It was about my soul. It was about the person he wanted to break, the person he thought he could own. Crawling back wasn't survival, it was annihilation. It was agreeing to become the small, compliant creature he envisioned. The sadness didn't vanish, but it shifted. It hardened into something cold and sharp. This wasn't over. Not while I still had breath in my body. He had pushed me to the edge, expecting me to fall. But he had only shown me how to fly. Or perhaps how to build wings from nothing. The turning point wasn't a sudden surge of hope. It was a chilling acceptance of the impossible. If the front door was locked, I would find a window. If the window was barred, I would dig a tunnel. There was always a way. His power was external, a prison built of money and control. My strength was internal. He couldn't block my mind. He couldn't block my will. I didn't make the call. I crumpled the note tighter in my fist until my knuckles were white. I stood up, stiff and aching, and walked to the window. It was dark outside, but there were stars. Small, distant points of light in the vastness. They weren't enough to illuminate the path, but they were proof that light existed even in the deepest night. My plan shifted again. It had to. The previous approach was dead. What could I do that required almost nothing but my time, my skills, and my sheer stubbornness? I stripped the concept back further, focusing on the absolute core of what I could offer, something digital, scalable, requiring minimal upfront cost. It was a long shot, a desperate Hail Mary, but it was my Hail Mary. The next few months were a blur of relentless work. I lived on ramen and the kindness of 1 or 2 friends who still quietly slipped me a 20 sometimes, never asking for repayment. I learned to code. I learned to market with 0 budget. I learned to sell ice to an Eskimo if I had to. The spare room was no longer an office. It was a war room. Maps, whiteboards, scribbled notes, empty coffee cups. The house around me faded into irrelevance. He was a ghost in the periphery, his presence a low thrum of antagonism I learned to tune out. He still made his passive-aggressive jabs, his quiet pronouncements of my impending failure. I met them with a polite, distant nod. His words had lost their power. They were just noise. I launched the new, stripped-down, bootstrapped version of my idea. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even polished. But it worked. And slowly, painfully, it started to gain traction. Small sales at first, then slightly larger ones. Enough to buy better ramen. Enough to keep the lights on just barely. Enough to pay back those friends. The growth was exponential, fueled by genuine need in the market and a relentless drive I didn't know I possessed. I worked 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. I hired help I couldn't afford, paying them percentages, promising future wealth. I built a team of believers, other people who were underestimated, hungry, and brilliant. We were lean. We were fast. We were invisible to the traditional gatekeepers he operated among. He noticed the change. The lights were on more often. I wasn't selling things anymore. The air around me felt different, charged, focused. He tried to pry, asking pointed questions about what I was doing, who I was talking to. I gave vague, dismissive answers. Just trying to make ends meet, I'd say, or playing around with some ideas. I let him believe it was still a hobby, a minor distraction before my inevitable return to his fold. The real battle was silent. He had no idea the scale of what I was building, not in his world of mergers and acquisitions and established wealth. My world was scrappy, digital, operating under the radar. It was the perfect camouflage. He was looking for me to fail publicly, dramatically, like a company going bankrupt. He didn't see the quiet, relentless build happening in the spare room of his own house. Investment opportunities started appearing. People who saw the rapid growth, the unique approach, the passionate team. I was cautious. I vetted them meticulously. I remembered how quickly things could be taken away. The deals I made were structured for maximum control on my end, for ironclad protection against anyone, especially him, ever being able to pull the rug out from under me again. We scaled.
Fast.
The initial success wasn't a fluke. The market was hungry. My team was incredible. My vision, born of desperation, turned out to be exactly what was needed. We outgrew the spare room. We moved into a small, then a larger office. But I kept my personal finances separate, rebuilding my own accounts slowly, meticulously. I still lived in that house, a strange, silent arrangement, a constant reminder of where I had come from. He still didn't know. He saw me leaving for an office, attending meetings, but he seemed to assume it was minor, local. He still held the keys to the joint accounts, the investments. He still thought he had the upper hand, the ultimate leverage. He was still waiting for me to crawl back, perhaps with a slightly larger but still insignificant venture. The talks started quietly. Exploratory calls from investment bankers, from venture capitalists interested in funding our next stage of growth. Then the word IPO was whispered. Initial public offering. Taking the company public. It felt surreal.
Impossible.
But the numbers supported it. The growth trajectory was undeniable. The market cap projections were staggering. It would provide the capital for massive expansion, global reach. And it would provide something else. Ultimate, undeniable validation. The process was intense, a whirlwind of audits, filings, meetings, due diligence. My life was reduced to work, sleep, and the silent tension of living under his roof, while planning something that would detonate his perception of reality. He was oblivious. He was busy with his own deals, his own world. He had dismissed my world so completely, he didn't even see it when it grew to encompass his own horizon. The day of the IPO was set. The culmination of everything. The early morning drive to the exchange felt dreamlike. The air was crisp, charged with anticipation. My team was buzzing. I was numb. It didn't feel real. Not yet.
We arrived.
The building was grand, imposing. We were ushered to a viewing area, a place set aside for the company leadership on their listing day. And there it was. The wall of screens. The ticker symbols scrolling by. The raw, chaotic energy of the trading floor below. Someone handed me a small flag, a ceremonial thing with our logo on it. People were talking to me, shaking my hand, smiling. The noise of the floor was rising. The moment was approaching. My heart, which had felt frozen for so long, began to beat again, a frantic drum against my ribs. And then it happened. The bell rang. The trading began. My company's symbol appeared on the screen. The numbers next to it began to move.
Up. Fast.
The roar of the floor intensified. Cheers erupted around me. My team was hugging, crying, laughing. But I couldn't move. I couldn't cheer. My eyes were fixed on the screen, on those letters, those numbers. They represented more than a company valuation. They represented every tear shed in the dark, every hungry night, every insult veiled as concern, every dollar earned through sheer will. They represented crawl back, shattered into a million pieces. The blue light of the screen washes over everything. My name is being called. Someone is nudging me forward. A camera flash pops. The noise is deafening now, a celebratory explosion. My body is moving, but my mind is back in that cold, dark house, hearing those words, seeing that calm, certain smile. And then I see him. Not here, of course. He isn't here. He has no idea. But in my mind, I see his study, the leather chair, the laptop. I see him going about his day, maybe checking his stocks, maybe reading the news, utterly unaware. The irony is a bitter taste in my mouth. He who controlled everything, who prided himself on his foresight and financial acumen, had no idea that the very foundation of his certainty was about to crumble because of the unviable little business his wife ran from a spare room. The climax wasn't just the IPO. It was the moment he found out. I wasn't there. I was still at the exchange, giving interviews, doing the surreal dance of a newly public company founder.
My phone rang.
It was his best friend. A man I'd known for years. A man who had always seemed slightly uncomfortable around me after the separation began, caught between loyalty. His voice was strained. He saw it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, like he was sharing news of a death. On the news. The business segment. I didn't say anything. Just held the phone, the celebratory din of the exchange floor a strange counterpoint to his hushed tone. He didn't understand at first. Didn't think it was your company. He thought it must be a similar name. He was laughing. Said it was a good thing you weren't still trying that nonsense. The cold satisfaction was a slow, steady burn through my veins. Go on, I thought. Tell me more.
Then
They showed your face. And the logo. And they mentioned you by name. The founder. He just froze, the friend's voice cracked. I've never seen him like that. He went pale. His eyes. Like he was seeing a ghost. And then, I prompted, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Then he started screaming.
Just
Screaming. Tearing the house apart. Throwing things. Yelling your name. Yelling about how could you, how did you? He kept yelling. You were supposed to crawl back. You were supposed to fail. The friend was silent for a moment, the sounds of the destruction echoing faintly even through the phone. He's completely lost it. The market reaction. It's huge. Your valuation. He didn't just block you. He didn't just cut you off. He isolated himself. He had no idea the scale of this. None of us did, he paused. He built a wall around his world, and your success just demolished it. The vindication wasn't a fiery triumph. It was a deep, chilling calm. He hadn't just expected my failure. His entire strategy was predicated on it. He had cut me off, not just to control me, but because he genuinely believed that without his resources, his guidance, I would wither and die financially. My success wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an existential threat to his view of himself, his power, his understanding of the world. He had underestimated me so profoundly that my victory was his utter, complete, blindsiding defeat. He thought he was orchestrating my return on my knees. Instead, I had built an empire while he wasn't looking, and that empire had just overshadowed his entire world. The screaming was the sound of his carefully constructed reality shattering. He wasn't screaming because I won. He was screaming because he had lost everything he thought he controlled. The silence that followed the friend's call was the quiet after the storm. The immediate aftermath wasn't celebratory.
it was
Empty.
exhausting.
I stood there on the trading floor, surrounded by the noise of success, and felt a profound sense of loneliness. The battle was over, yes. I had won, beyond my wildest, most desperate hopes. But the cost felt immense. The house felt different when I finally returned. It was still the same house, the same expensive, silent furniture, the same air of his presence. But his screaming had stripped away its pretense of normalcy. He wasn't there. He had retreated, perhaps to lick his wounds, perhaps to figure out how to navigate a world where I was no longer the dependent wife, but the wildly successful founder of a publicly traded company. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and brutal, but for the first time, I had the resources to protect myself, to fight on equal footing. The financial cage he had built crumbled instantly. The joint accounts were split, the assets divided. But it felt like sorting through the debris of a life that no longer existed. My success didn't bring pure joy. It brought freedom, security, power. It brought the ability to build whatever I wanted, however I wanted, accountable to no one but myself and my shareholders. It brought the quiet satisfaction of proving every doubter wrong, most importantly, the one who mattered most in that moment of despair. But it also brought the knowledge of how close I had come to breaking, how thin the line was between fighting and surrendering. The relationship, of course, was over. Irrevocably. The screaming wasn't a cry of anger. It was a final, desperate lament for the loss of control. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost the carefully constructed narrative of his own superiority. What did I learn? That desperation can be a fertile ground for innovation. that the most powerful prisons are often the ones we don't realize we're in until the door slams shut. That being underestimated can be your greatest weapon. And that sometimes the coldest, most satisfying revenge is simply building a life so big and so bright that it casts a shadow over the one who tried to diminish you. I sold the house. Every piece of furniture. Every memory. I built a new life, brick by painstaking brick, not on anger, but on the quiet certainty of my own strength. The blue light of the screen is still there, a reminder. A reminder not just of success, but of the darkness I had to walk through to get here. It was a tragic beginning, a brutal struggle, and a bittersweet victory. But it was mine. Every single step, every single dollar, every single scream. If this story hit close to home, or if you've ever faced a moment where someone tried to dim your light, I'd love to hear your version. Sharing these pieces of ourselves is how we build something new together. And if you found yourself drawn into this, please consider subscribing. It truly helps bring more of these stories to life. Thanks for being here.